นีต่อไปนานา
Tom Luongo, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So
How are
Tom is a geopolitical analyst and a fan of both hockey and Rush.
Yeah, that is true.
If you only listed Lauren Green as your favorite actor, you might have qualified for honorary Canadian citizenship.
No, but I am a fan of like all the low budget Canadian sci-fi that showed up on Sci-Fi Network down here for years, like shows like Orphan Black and Continuum and a few others. Like most of them are pretty good, like for what they are, made on for $50, and you see the same actors over and over again. It's I know that guy, so it's good stuff.
Yeah, I think you know more about them than I do.
Probably because I'm not that kind of geek. So
well, I wanted to speak with you about the sort of the political implications regarding your thesis of Davos versus BRICS versus the commercial banks. But
sure,
if we can, before we get into that, I wanted to ask you more of a higher, order question in regards to monetary theory, which is not my area of expertise by any means.
Fair enough.
So I think for the vast majority of people, when they hear anyone talk about this sort of consolidation of power within global institutions, so for example, the IMF or the UN, they immediately disregard it as a conspiracy theory. I think the reason for this is they mistakenly believe it is entirely ideologically driven, right? And they can't believe that there are influential individuals who would be so obsessed with the dream of centralized global authority that they would pursue this idea, and across generations. Like it doesn't happen overnight; it takes forever and ever and ever. But I guess what I've been wondering is the primary driver of this not really ideological at all, but it's more simply sort of cold, hard math of a debt-based, monetary.
A little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. Like, I mean, there's some people out there that have been born into and created generational wealth for themselves. They have the best word for it is solipsism, where they see the world through their particular lens that has rewarded them with their success. And so it's very easy when you become successful, because most people struggle on a day-to-day basis, and we're all very humble in the face of our meager accomplishments in our lives, that we don't ever really get subsumed into the arrogance of believing, well, I'm successful, and now because I'm successful, everybody else, well, they could be successful if they really wanted to be, and if they're not, it's because they deserve to be. And there's a difference between, I don't believe in deserve. I believe in, I firmly believe in the best, the line at the end of Unforgiven, where Bill Money turns to the guy and says, well, I guess they all had it coming. And he's like, well, and he's about to shoot Gene Hackman. He says, well, deserves got nothing to do with this. Right. The point of that story is that nobody deserves anything in this life. There's no sense of entitlement to any of your wealth or your status or your power or anything along those lines. You just are who you are, and you're the sum total of your decisions in your life. And little Bill made his decisions, and the repercussions of that was Bill Money came and shot him in the face because he decorated his bar with his friend, right? Well, and the same thing here. I'm a little off the topic, but you have to understand you asked about the psychology of it, because how you could get people over the course of multiple generations, having been born into wealth and accumulated power and kept that power through generations or centuries, come to a sense of entitlement towards that institution that is that power, the institutions that create, that to perpetuate that power, right? That are the instantiation of that power. So once you get into the sense of entitlement, right, and you don't want that taken away, well, then they're going to fight tooth and nail to keep it, and they're going to do things that even though their systems that they've created are unsustainable, right? And they invariably, when any kind of centralization of market forces happens because of the use of force in order to what's the best way of putting this? When you use force to move people's decisions away from the decisions that they want to make, you create friction within an economy, which ultimately has to express itself through a loss, and then that loss has to be made up somewhere else. And it becomes, those losses build up over time. Those interventions into the marketplace build up over time. Eventually, you have to issue debt, which you can't pay back. You eventually put more energy in to get less energy out, and then you force. And then what they're doing at the top of all this through the monetary system is, of course, they're making us pay through taxes and inflation and everything else. So when you understand that these are unsustainable systems that they've created, and now they're using our economic activity, and they're using the metaphor of climate change to make us feel bad for supporting their unsustainable systems. They're now turning us into we who are the victims of their unsustainable systems are now the people who feel like we deserve this to ourselves because we've destroyed the planet. Think about that. And that's the dodge that they're laying on top of us right now. That's the narrative, the thing that they've infected so many people with, and people like myself. I'm like, yeah, I can see exactly what that is, and I'm like, absolutely not. I refuse to be the carbon that they want to be reduced. So, but once you understand that it's just an outgrowth of their own previous successes and their own previous wars against other factions or other people, that this is where they are, and so it becomes their ideology. It becomes their own religion, which is they have their religion, which is they want power and they want to perpetuate that power. How are they going to, like all good cult leaders, how are they going to get other people to support that situation, that religion, and then turn it into their own end? So they corrupt governments, they corrupt bureaucrats, they corrupt corporations, they corrupt local officials. It doesn't matter. And the system, it doesn't matter if we're talking about a small level of corruption in a small town or a small city. The mechanisms are the same. Or we're talking about the planet, the mechanisms are exactly the same. And when it's built up over the way it has been within Europe and the United States over the course of the last, say, 500 years, since the Enlightenment, or since the Renaissance, and then into the Enlightenment and everything else, and the 300 plus years now of central bank autonomy, corrupting the monetary system, where they have access to the money that's printed and created first, and then can, through the Cantillon effect, can bear the brunt, can force the brunt of the inflation that they create onto the people that they sell their nonsense to, right? So they create tomorrow's money and buy stuff at today's prices, or they create tomorrow's money, which they buy yesterday's prices for today's goods.
Right. And
that process is what ultimately entrenches their power for a certain amount of time, and every time and through every iteration of the monetary system, they have to build another Ponzi scheme, another layer to the Ponzi scheme, issuing more and more debt until eventually the whole thing collapses, and then it becomes just a matter of math. And that's, of course, the Misesian or Austrian view of this. What I've described in a kind of roundabout way is the Austrian Misesian view of intervention into the open market. Now, when we use the term free market, we really just are saying the natural state or set of decisions that people would make given their own incentive structure, without anybody else, without any governmental force taking away their options, right? So if we want to trade with Russia, go right. If you're with a Russian company, you should be free to do so. The government shouldn't have any control over imports and export controls or anything along those lines. And once you understand that, once you take that as the baseline, and then everything, and that's equilibrium, that should be what is known as equilibrium, then anything else away from that is a distortion, and eventually will be revealed as being mathematically unsustainable. But they'll use their ideology to try and promulgate sustainability, the illusion of sustainability, far longer than it needs to. And all they're doing is continually building up a bigger and bigger Ponzi scheme until the whole thing collapses. Right. We're right about that moment now.
Okay. So, so it's both then, what you're saying is absolutely.
Absolutely.
The Ponzi scheme requires you to when the confidence starts to shatter, you have to roll it all up into an even bigger new Ponzi scheme. And that
Right.
that in itself attracts people who ideologically want centralization of power to begin with.
Sure.
They just feed off one another. And so,
well, yeah, no, Hayek described it beautifully in the Road to chapter 10 of the Road to Serfdom, right? Which is that it's a mechanism by which the people who are attracted to power, the people who want to exercise power, are attracted to positions that give them power, and therefore they become the most easily corrupted. And they are the ones that ultimately, over the course of time, no matter how moral the society, with an immoral money or an immoral governmental system, you will eventually break down the morality of the society. And fiat debt-based currency is absolutely, and then the only thing worse than fiat-based or fiat debt-based currency would be fiat central bank issued digital currency. It's the only worse version of it, the only more amoral or even immoral version of money, because it's completely corrupted, because there's no work associated with the creation of new monetary units before the monetary units are created. There's no opportunity cost for creating new ones. So therefore, he who gets the ability to print the money has the advantage over those who have to receive the money. And that system, again, tomorrow's goods at yesterday's price, or today's goods at yesterday's prices for tomorrow's money, right? Over and over and over again. That system slowly but surely undermines the entire society. It teaches through the generations that, why work hard? Because you just can steal it from other people. It's better to steal, or if you can't steal, then check out and force them to pay you UBI or welfare or whatever. And that's the situation we have today. You have people of my age complain about millennials, and younger complain about the millennials about, they don't want to really do anything. Like, well, yeah, they don't want to do anything. They don't want to, because they don't have any hope. Yep. So if they have no hope, why should they care about their job? Why should they care about their career? Why should they care about building a family or anything else? Because they don't have any hope. You give them hope, and all of a sudden all their behavior will change. But they don't have any hope, so they just kind of check out, and they're not going to, like care about the hamster wheel, and more of them aren't going to care about being on the hamster wheel. So.
Exactly. So, I mean, can we then shift, and I know you've probably described this, a dozen times in interviews over the last few months, but can we sort of do the overview of the sort of Davos versus BRICS versus commercial banks? That's my sort of understanding of your.
Yeah, it's not hard. The biggest problem that people have when they first start to understand or start to become interested in and horrified by the way the world, when they finally perceive how they think the world works, which is the way the world works, is that everything has to, like everything else, we reduce things to the simplest solution, the simplest story, because we're trying to wrap our heads around it. We can't wrap our heads around complexity, right? I'm 20 years into wrapping my head around the complexity that is this world, and on a mission personally to understand it better on a day-to-day basis. So it's like, it's like crack for me, right? Like it's the thing. It's like my kryptonite. I can't not do it. Not everybody has that desire, and not everybody has that, that drive or whatever. That's fine. So I don't begrudge anybody who gets into this, watches, a guy like me or Alex Jones or somebody else, and they explain, or even Peter Schiff or, others within that kind of dissident commentariat, and then grasp onto the thing they understand best. The debt-based money is bad, gold therefore good. Okay, now let's start crafting. That means the central banks are bad. That means this is bad, and then you start to build that intellectual edifice from very simple, and I don't want to say crude, because that's not even a fair assessment. Just large building blocks. But unfortunately, this edifice is all far bigger than just a small hut. It's a very intricately built castle, for lack of a better term, right? You're not trying to build, a small brick building. You're trying to build a Scottish castle as the metaphor for what's actually going on, with all of this labyrinths and big rooms and all of that stuff that goes along. It's to support that. So as you add information it becomes harder and harder as you deal with this. It becomes harder and harder to add complexity if you aren't willing to do the work. And so one of the things that what I'm saying is, what I'm getting at here is, I don't begrudge anybody for just keeping a simplistic model, but the world is far more complex. And the groups that are fighting it out are far more complex than they've ever have been in the past. And the reason for that is that we are at the moment where all of these systems are failing. And now everybody who used to make money off of the system, who used to get benefit off the system, are now looking at their time horizons going, this is not going to work for me in the future. And now you have all the people who used to agree this is a great idea because I could make money off of it and I could make money off of it. You had the purely cynical, hey, I just want to make some money off this, the Gordon Gekko types or whatever, the JP Morgan types. And then on the other side, you have the Klaus Schwabs who were truly ideologically driven. And for a long time, you had a confluence of where all of their interests aligned. For most of the post-World War II period, all of their interests aligned. So it was easy to go with the simple narrative, oh yeah, it's all a big club and we're not in it. But that's not the case anymore. And up until the moment, I would say that Jerome Powell was installed as Fed chairman by Donald Trump, who had no idea who he was actually nominating to the head of the Federal Reserve. But he was given Powell by the people who were in his cabinet, so Mnuchin and others, who probably at that moment realized that between Trump's election and Brexit in Britain, that there was a populist revolt occurring in the West against what was happening with the European oligarchy. Mm-hmm. The old European colonialist money, the Rothschilds, or whatever. Like we all, everybody in the space, they talk about the Rothschilds and the, all the old commercial, and fine. Yeah, they're all involved in this. And they're probably the ones standing behind people like Klaus Schwab and others. But at some point, while JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs used to be, my enemy, sure, today they're not. I mean, they're long-term, they're still my enemy because they, but right now, they're the ones who have the power and the resources and the weapons to fight what's going on, the centralization of power in a global sense, where they will be cut out because there's no room for commercial banks in Klaus Schwab's future. It'll all just be a central banks. And honestly, it'll all be a central bank, mm-hmm. the IMF, run by the United Nations. That's their goal. Okay. If you want a simple story to hang your hat on, Klaus Schwab wants the IMF to be the central bank for the global UN government. Nice and simple. No commercial banks. We don't need commercial banks anymore. Do you think that JP Morgan, I just ask a simple question. Do you think JP Morgan is going to be cool with this? Yeah. I don't. And that's the question I asked myself the minute I started looking at this. So Powell, whose nickname previously was Private Equity Powell, was given to Donald Trump as the replacement for Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen being, along with Ben Bernanke, being one of these ideologues that ideological. I like to use the term quisling, even though I know it's terribly charged, but that's the point. Who work for Davos, who work for these international primarily European oligarchs. Most of the American oligarchs haven't had a kick at the can for long enough. They're honestly, most American money is looked upon by your old European money as a bunch of upstarts. We need to take all their money back from the first place. They don't have any, they're the nouveau riche of the elite, of the global elite set, right? So they don't. Do you think that Trump was never able to get into that club officially? They always kind of looked at him askance, even though he's like second or third generation money. But because he's American and worse, of Scottish extraction, are you kidding me? Like, do you think that old Belgian and French and German money is going to look at, a third generation boorish property developer from Queens of Scottish extraction and look at him and go, yeah, you get to be part of the club? Oh, no. I mean, they'll let him into the parties, but he'll never be part of the club. And so understand that, these people all don't like each other. They never have. They fought wars with each other. And they've made us fight world wars on their behalf for them previously. So do you really think they like each other? You think that when You think that when this stuff goes on, that like, when they sit down and they have cigars and whiskey at the end of the week and they're figuring out what's going on, you think they're going, oh yeah, that guy Schwab, he's crazy. And then, if Jaiman and, previously Lloyd Blankfein or whoever the guy who runs Citigroup, they sit together for drinks at the end of the week and they go, so, what can we do about it? Well, before Trump, they couldn't do anything about it. Today, we can put the right guy in charge of the Federal Reserve who will set policy and not care about the damage it does to Europe. Whereas Bernanke and Yellen, every time European banks got into trouble, they bailed them out. I'm just keeping it simple. I'll get into the technical stuff about how this works in a minute.
Yep. So
previous to Trump, they didn't have that. They didn't have a Fed chairman who wanted to act on behalf of the United States, or more appropriately, on behalf of the Federal Reserve. Even if you don't want to believe that the Fed is acting on behalf of the United States as a sovereign actor, just think of it as the Federal Reserve is acting on its own behalf. Yep. That's enough, right? Because when you're looking at what the attitude of the ECB and who's in charge of the ECB and who was in charge of putting that person in charge of the ECB, i.e. Klaus Schwab, and you saw that when they, and that same person was the person who was put in charge of the IMF after they got rid of the previous guy at the top of the IMF because he wouldn't go along with the global plan. So they put Christine Lagarde in charge of the IMF, taught her how to be a central banker, and then moved her into the IMF and then into the ECB after they moved Mario Draghi out of the ECB and put him in charge of Italy. Like, if you don't see the connection between, and Klaus Schwab is the guy making that happen. At the same time, the IMF is now run by, and then she was replaced at the IMF by another WEF world, a young leader, Georgieva, right? So like the IMF is what used to be an American controlled institution, is now controlled by Europe. The World Bank is now controlled by Europe. The WHO is controlled by Europe because the American forces within the WHO all work for Davos. Birx and Fauci and all these people, they all work for them because you can tell by the policy that they put together. So when you're looking at the game board and you're going, okay, we're losing, and you're JP Morgan, you're the guy who runs JP Morgan, you're Jamie Dimon, you're looking at the game board and you're like, okay, I don't know what to do here. I mean, we can't have this happen. How are we going to stop it? Well, we could get control of the Federal Reserve. Since we're the shareholders in the New York Fed, we kind of have a little power there. And we are the most powerful political lobbying group in the entire world. The New York commercial banks, far more powerful than the City of London banks. City of London banks are only so powerful because of LIBOR. So now you're the most powerful banks in the world. You control the most powerful central bank in the world with the world's dominant reserve currency. And you got these upstarts over in Europe with a fatally flawed currency, with a rival central bank that you can bankrupt because it doesn't have the same tools that you have. It doesn't have the ability to print unlimited amount of elastic money. The ECB is not the same central bank. That most people don't understand this. It's not the same central bank as the Fed. The Bank of Japan is organized like the Fed is, others, the Bank of Russia, yada, yada, but not the ECB. The ECB is a fatally flawed institution that can be attacked and should be attacked because it's the seat of the worst kind of communism, European communism, because that's where it came from. As Putin likes to reminded us at the beginning of the year, communism is a European idea that you guys gave to us and nearly destroyed us with. Sorry, we don't want it back. You get to keep it. So when I think about this, like it made perfect sense to me, like that if they can get the right guy in charge of the Fed and the Fed holds the line, eventually, even if the European banks go busto, well, we don't have to bail them out because we can shore up our banks. And then you start putting in the pieces together of all the information you've heard over the last 4 or 5 years. What prompted the repo crisis of 2019? American banks refusing to take European sovereign and corporate debt as repo collateral. So the European banks couldn't get access to dollars. They started voluntarily severing the connection between American and European banks, thereby making the Eurodollar, the offshore Eurodollar markets, which was the source of most of the credit dollars in the world up until that point, and the source of Davos's power, that dried that up, drive that engine up, that they couldn't gear up anymore. They couldn't, the Fed couldn't create, $500 billion. And, while the Fed was maybe creating $500 billion here and there, the Eurodollar credit system the shadow banking system could create 10 trillion and completely overwhelm the Fed's ability to control monetary policy. This is building off of work by Jeff Snyder, formerly of Alhambra Partners. Where Jeff has gone wrong is that Jeff does not realize that the link between Eurodollar markets and American markets has been severed. And it's been severed because we no longer are attached at the hip to them through LIBOR. So now now let's go back to 2017. You're Jamie Dimon. You're, John, I think it's John Solomon is the head of Goldman. You got Citigroup sitting around having drinks. How are we going to stop? We got the president. We can get a good Fed chairman in. And now what do we do? Oh, well, we can resurrect this idea of SOFR, the secured overnight funding rate, as a replacement for LIBOR that we've had on the back burner that we couldn't get through Obama for 8 years. We can now get that done. John Williams comes in, takes over the Atlanta Fed, and Powell gives him that project. Within 6 months, pilot project for SOFR starts. SOFR is going to be implemented as the replacement for LIBOR for all U.S. debt issued, all debt issued in the United States as the indexing rate for all that debt by the end of 2021. Starting in 2022, you can't index debt anymore to LIBOR in the United States, or at the very least, you shouldn't. And, because LIBOR is going to be phased out by the middle of next year. Another thing about Brexit that nobody in Europe is happy about, because what's always happened in the past, right, is the very simple thing of what's going on was that every time the Fed would try to tighten and all the credit dollars that were out there were all being created offshore, then when the Fed tried to raise interest rates and crush, and stop credit creation, because when they did that, it would force all the offshore banks into receivership or into trouble. LIBOR would blow out to the upside because now everybody's scrambling around to get dollars. So LIBOR would go from 0.5% to 9%. And guess what would happen to your adjustable rate mortgage? Your adjustable rate mortgage would go up by 8.5% because it was indexed to LIBOR, even though your bank is fine.
Yep.
So now all of a sudden, everybody's, so once that link between Europe and the United States is done, the Fed can now raise interest rates and they can fail and we can be fine. And so I've been tracking the 1 month LIBOR versus SOFR spread for the last couple of months and just watching it to see what it's doing. And it's doing exactly what you would expect. That every time the Fed raises interest rates, the spread collapses. And then as we get to the next interest rate hike, the spread starts to ride out, to blow out. But now LIBOR is rising faster between Fed meetings than the expectation of what the Fed is going to raise. And so now we're getting an indicator of relative stress within the European banking system and the American banking system. Because if SOFR is just trading at 3 to 5 basis points above the Fed funds rate, okay, that's fine. And if the Fed's banking stress indicator is at the lowest level it's been ever in recorded history, then why is the ECB so reluctant to raise rates? Why is why before they even talked about ending QE or raising rates, they were talking about having to come up with a new QE program?
Yeah.
So because the Europe is the primary beneficiary or the primary target of Fed interest rate rising, and this is a cost push inflationary environment. Interest rates don't affect inflation in a cost push environment. The problem isn't too much money driving unsustainable growth. The problem is not enough goods and the same amount of money bidding up, or actually more money bidding up fewer goods. and it's the and with oil prices where they are, costs are just rising. Everybody's bidding for labor that's not available, and copper and lead and tin and soybeans and everything else is not available. And so cost push inflation you can't crush that with interest rates. So the Fed's lying when they say we're going to try and tame inflation by raising interest rates. No. The Fed is raising interest rates to destroy the ECB. And the ECB is only raising interest rates now to keep its credibility from being completely tarnished, completely trashed, and Eurobonds yields blow out to double digits. It's a confidence game. So the Fed is regaining confidence with every rate hike. The ECB is hanging on by their fingernails.
So
because everything's in place, because all the tools are in place.
So what is the end game if the Fed and the commercial banks achieve their goal? Like, I don't think, no, we're not suggesting that Russia and the commercial banks are all benevolent good guys. We're not suggesting that in the scenario at all.
No, but they may be working in concert.
Oh yeah, okay.
I got one last thing to bake your noodle. They may actually be working in concert with one another to bankrupt Europe, because they have mutual coincidence of need.
Yeah.
Right. Meaning the Russians need to destroy the EU because the EU is a cancer. And the Fed needs to get rid of the EU because they're a cancer. And, we also need to, stop funding the warmongers on both sides of the Atlantic in Europe and the United States. And you do that by radically shrinking the credit markets.
Right.
Right.
I saw an interesting interview with Lavrov this morning, and he actually referenced, or I don't know if the interview asked him or he brought it up, but this obsession with population reduction that's coming from like Western elites. He actually mentioned it, which I thought was surprising. And he's like, I don't know what they're thinking, basically. And I guess that comes back to your point that they're just like they've had enough of Europe. They don't even understand.
Oh yeah, no, they're completely done with Europe. And what Lavrov is saying is like, look, that they're obsessed with population reduction because they can't afford the costs. Right. They've got defined benefit pension systems. They've got social safety nets they can't afford anymore. That's the cold hard math portion that we opened up the show with, right? So the cold hard math is that there's no way out of this. There's no way to pay off the debt. No one's suggesting here that the Fed is engineering a way out for the United States. The Fed is going to be dealing with a problem later. But when you're the biggest Ponzi scheme in the world, you can bankrupt all the other Ponzi schemes. Yeah. All the little ones, and roll them up into your Ponzi scheme. And then eventually you're going to have to pay the piper. Eventually you're going to have to deal with gold. Eventually you're going to have to deal with Bitcoin or whatever competing reserve hard currency asset wins that fight. And we're not anywhere close to determining what's going to win that fight. So I just tell everybody, buy it all. Yeah. And then, have some gold, have some Bitcoin, have some silver, have some this, have some Chinese yuan if you're really worried about it. Like, have access to oil stocks and transportation stocks for the same reason. You don't know what's going on.
Like, so Davos in Europe, I think they're laying out very clearly what the world would look like, what their plan is, right? Like they're very clear about it, what they want. They want like technocratic control grid, fossil fuel.
Minority Report with Germans. Yeah. It's the movie Minority Report, but with more Germans. It's like the best way of putting it. Okay.
But what's less clear is what will the world look like? Maybe they manage to hold on to Europe and they cleave that off and they control that and they get exactly what they want within Europe.
Sure.
What I think it's necessary to.
What does the world look like at that point?
Well, no, more like what society is Russia going to build, or is the U.S. going to build if the Fed comes?
They're all going to build their individual societies. Is what's going to happen. The United States is going to have to retrench. If I'm right about what's going on here, then I don't see Goldman, Morgan, Citi. I don't see them wanting to exert global control. Okay, I think they still want to have a business. They want to be in. They don't just want to be, the credit card companies. They don't just want to, basically what Schwab wants to do is turn them into Visa and MasterCard. And Visa and MasterCard are getting destroyed by Bitcoin or, by the blockchain eventually. So, right. Lightning Network, whatever you want to call it, which is all just a stopgap until we get the, a proper crypto future, which is at least 30 years in the future, as far as I can see. But I can see the end game.
Right.
The world is going to be the world that the Chinese and the Russians have been offering us for 20 years and we refuse to take. Look, Asia is going to be its own area. The Chinese are probably, more colonialist than they want to let on to believe, but I'm not sure that the CCP is going to be able to hold on to power in the way they're holding on to power for more than a generation, right? For another generation, while this whole war over the future of money plays itself out. Like Martin Armstrong's been banging this shoe on the table saying that by 2032, we're going to be looking at China being the world's destination for global capital. And okay, if he's right about that prediction, and it's a perfectly reasonable prediction to make given the landscape today. But if Socrates is right about this, my big question is how long does China stay in charge? Because given, and what actually happens between now and then that allows China to take over? Is that Xi's vision becomes real, or is that Xi's vision is found to be wanting as well, and something major happens within China, which actually opens it up properly? But that can't happen until after Davos has been destroyed and the United States empire has been curtailed. Yeah. Now imagine that world 10 years from now. I mean, this is I'm just free associating here, but none of us, the point being is that none of us have enough of a crystal ball to know what that's going to look like. We can kind of see the general path of things, but there's so many details that have to be drawn in. What I think the Fed is trying to do, when I think the political elite within the United States that is sovereigntist, that believes in the United States and as an entity that needs to exist. Like Europe wants their colonies back. It's not that hard. Since the day after Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, the British have been trying to figure out how to get their colonies back. Yep. Okay, this is just history, people. Like, it's not hard. Now we can talk about the infiltration of MI6 into the CIA and the creation of the CIA and the DOD and the State Department and everything else. Sure, we can talk about all that all day long. We can talk about how deeply embedded these people are in every level of our bureaucracy. But just in the broad strokes of history, the United States is what? 233 years old since the founding of the signing of the Constitution. For 233 years minus 1 day, the Brits have been trying to get us back. Period. Like, it's just that simple. So when you look at history that way, you realize that they will take, and not just the British at this point, now it's all of Europe want their colonies back. And they still want the Russians destroyed. What's been the overarching it's been the overarching theme of British foreign policy for the last 150 years. Destroy the Russians. They fought 2 world wars to destroy the Russians. They fomented 2 world wars to fight then got us involved in 2 world wars to kill the Russians. Nothing's new. They were fighting in Afghanistan in the 1870s, for Christ's sake. This stuff's been going on for 150 years. Like, nothing ever changes in that respect. So nothing is going to change until this group of people that we discussed the evolution of at the beginning of the show are bankrupted. And there's only one way to bankrupt them. You take away their money spigot. You have to bankrupt them, period. Yeah, they may still own their ancestral lands. They may still own their yachts and blah, blah, blah. But I got news for you. The checks, the bribery checks start bouncing. And all of a sudden, all those, politicians that swear fealty to Klaus Schwab and George Soros, and the Rothschilds behind them and everybody else, like that, all that goes away. And the way you bankrupt them is you destroy their money spigot, their ability to create money whenever they need to and whenever they want to. Yeah. These 500- and 600-year-old European banks have been destroyed. And Schwab has been the architect of the destruction of them because he wants to destroy them so that he could roll the power up to the ECB and then hand all that power up to the IMF. And the Fed is looking at it going, yeah, well, we can just destroy the European commercial banks, and then we can add a period to that sentence. No, we'll just destroy the European banks, period. No, and. No more subordinate clauses. No, we just like simple grammar, not my grammar. Like,
Are the Feds, and the Fed and the commercial banks that they're aligned with, are they like patriots, for lack of a better word? Like I saw the movie, the Harvey Keitel film Lansky, about Meyer Lansky, and they
right.
recall this famous historical incident where during the Second World War, the US government actually approached the mafia and actually worked together because they wanted the mafia to go down to the docks and root out the German, infiltrated spies. And, there's sort of this sense that although they are not moral people, these gangsters did it because they were still patriots to the US and they still believed in the basis. Does that exist in this scenario?
Absolutely. I absolutely
we just want to keep our money. And
I absolutely believe that I think Jerome Powell gets up in the morning and says, I believe in capitalism.
Right.
I believe in rule of law. I believe in corporate law. I believe in all these basic kind of ideas. I think Jamie Dimon gets up in the morning and believes those things.
Right.
Like, I don't have a hard time believing that Dimon doesn't believe those things. I also don't have a problem believing that Jamie Dimon doesn't have people killed on a daily basis.
Right.
Like, I may be wrong about that. I'm not accusing him of that. I'm just saying I can hold all of those ideas about Jamie Dimon in my head all at the same time. So, and that's fine. Like, he may be trying to, extract as much wealth from his customer base as he wants. He may actually care about his customers. I don't know. He and his organization may have been rigging the gold price for years and suppressing the price of gold for years in order to stave off the attacks on the American financial system and political system from Europe.
Yeah.
Here's one to bake your noodle, right? And I'm absolutely I'm not rooting in favor of the government coming down on JP Morgan right now. I'm a gold buck. I love gold. I want to see gold rise, but I don't want to see gold rise at this point until the Fed beats the ECB, because the ECB needs a higher gold price to offset the collapse of the value of the European sovereign debt they have on their balance sheet. They have access to almost 20,000 tons of gold. If they were to nationalize, and that's obviously the goal, is to nationalize all of the European sovereign gold, put it on the ECB's balance sheet, and jack the price of gold to $15,000 an ounce, all of a sudden the ECB is solvent. And the Fed has a confidence issue. Fed has a credibility issue, because the Fed holds its gold on its balance sheet at $42.22 an ounce, the price that the Treasury sold it to in August of 1971. And the Fed has absolutely no incentive to see the price of gold rise until the Fed wants to remonetize gold. But that's not going to happen until we're ready to do honest to God fiscal reform here in the US.
Yeah.
When is that going to occur? Well, talk to me after the midterms, talk to me after the 2024 election.
Is that why, Italy always seems to play an important role?
Sure.
They also hold, I believe, the most gold of the European
countries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like 3,700 tons of, of sovereign gold. And look, Davos just got its, hat handed to them in Rome. And I wrote last week about this, and I said, look, or a week and a half ago about this, when Draghi first resigned, and then he and Mattarella and the Roman mafia tried to engineer a way out so that they can get Draghi to pass all of this terrible, the equivalent of Build Back Better for Italy, that would have subordinated the Italian government, regardless of who wins next year's election, which is now going to be held in September. But go back to 2 weeks ago, and as of 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, the elections weren't going to be held until next year. What they were trying to do was pass all this spending legislation that would have tied them to the European Commission in perpetuity, regardless of what the intentions of the new government. So if the brothers of Italy and Lega and Forza Italia won that election, they would still be tied to the European Commission, to the debts that Draghi's government signed them up to, and there has been no way for them to leave the euro or leave the European Union at that point. So this government falling before that got passed is a massive loss for the EU. and for Europe and for Davos or European Davos. There's still plenty of American Anglo Davos, and then Joe Biden, Obama, that whole crew. They're all in the tank for Davos and selling out the country to Europe. Now, Joe Biden doesn't work for the Chinese. Joe Biden works for Klaus Schwab. Joe Biden doesn't work for anybody. He works for Jello at this point. But whatever they're going to, and nap time. But Obama works for those guys. Period. The Chinese are just in there and the Russians are in there helping the situation because they don't mind the United States being destabilized. But they also don't want to see the United States destabilized completely. But they understand that if you destabilize the United States in multiple levels, that it'll be easier for them to pick off Europe later on if they need to. But, that's nice. But the goal of global communism has always been destroy the United States. So I look at this and I say, when, Italy is the fulcrum on all of this, because if the Italians go to elections, which they're going to now, it's going to be, I think, on September 25th, they're going to go to the polls. Most likely the center-right coalitions are going to win, if not win hard. I think the polls are constantly have them right around 49% of the population, total, between FDL, Lega, and Forza Italia. But I could easily see them winning 55 to 56%, maybe even as much as 60% as a group now that, all of this is done. And the depth of the betrayal of the Italian people has been fully revealed. I want to know how that happened. I want to know how Giuseppe Conte, who was Merkel's bagman to keep Italy in the EU, after the entire time when M5S and Lega were a power sharing agreement when they were in charge, that guy was always the bagman for Davos. And now he's the guy who pulled out of, and he's the guy leading the faction with M5S to take down Draghi's government. Well, I gotta ask a simple question. Do you think that happens and all of a sudden Lega gets a spine? They haven't had a spine for 3 years since Salvini was put under the court order. Was sued for being interior minister over the stupid Soros-led thing out of Sicily. And Forza Italia, they've been irrelevant since the last election. And they all walked out the other day and denied Draghi even a quorum, no less another vote, another confidence vote. He said, "No, you're not even getting the vote. We're just leaving." How does that happen? What changed that all of a sudden these people got a spine? I'll tell you what happened. They got the call from the freaking Fed. They got a call from Jamie Dimon, for lack of a better person.
And what is Dimon?
And they said, "Oh, by the way, we're winning, and we're going to get rid of these people. You better. Joe Biden's done. We're going to win the elections in the fall. They're done. It's all over. So you better. So you have the opportunity now to get on the winning team, dude.
Yep.
And save Italy. And if you save Italy, you break Europe. If you break Europe, you kill the Eurodollar markets. If you break the Eurodollar markets, we're all going to win in the long run."
So it sort of seems like it's, for Davos, it's not going to plan. So
No.
Is it possible that it's actually backwards and that they're the useful idiots for the commercial banks?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, wow. I've never actually considered that. And I'll be honest, that's a really good, that's interesting.
Because
Okay.
I could see, I could see, banks, funding these, eugenicist, whatever, think tanks and transhumanist conferences. And maybe the thinking is, wow, these guys are, really batshit crazy. But if we give them this safe space, they'll actually reveal their inner thoughts, right? And then everybody will see what it is they really have in mind. I mean,
wow,
could that
brilliant. But I don't think the game's that deep. But I think it's a really cool. I think it's a really cool story, and I know that I would write that story if I was ever had ambitions of being a novelist again or a screenwriter again. I don't think so. I don't think it's that. I just don't think it's that complicated. And the reason is that there comes a point where sometimes, as complicated as things are, when you really stop to look at what we're dealing with here, we're dealing with very simple first order responses to stimuli.
Yeah.
Right. They had a plan. Everybody was on board with the plan because everybody was incentivized by the plan.
So
then we reach the end of the plan and the plan starts to break down. I mean, because this was all published as Agenda 2050 originally, but then it had to be pushed up to Agenda 2030. Now, why is it Agenda 2030? Because Trump was elected in 2016, because Brexit happened in 2016. Sure. Was that, were those backed by, I don't think anybody expected Trump to win,
right,
including Trump. If Trump had the backing of Goldman and Morgan and whatnot during the election cycle, he wouldn't have been so flabbergasted on election night. Hillary wouldn't have been so despondent. They all expected her to win. There was no hope at that point. The American people, in a sense, saved the world because we turned out in numbers that they couldn't cheat. In the same way that Brexit was probably 55-45, not 52-48. The British people turned out in numbers and actually were given the opportunity to express themselves. And I think, look, the commercial banks are staring at an existential threat to their business. You don't invite that kind of existential threat to your business just because you want to, do the judo double throw. It's not strategically or tactically the right play. The right play is, we'll try and lever it up one last time. Oh, that's not going to work. Okay. Well, I think I think the problem here is that everybody wants to, again, you want to try and reduce it to something. The commercial banks there was always a way out for the United States. Under Trump, even under Obama, zero bound interest rate policy gave us a tremendous debt load, but also gave us the lowest debt servicing to GDP ratio in the post-World War II period. Okay. So US GDP, I mean, now you could argue that US GDP is overstated because a lot of it is frothy credit money. Okay, fine. You can make the argument. But let's just start with those numbers. And then let's bring in something that both Mnuchin and Trump both talked about early on in his presidency. This idea does not come from out of Donald Trump's mouth without it having been put into Donald Trump's head by somebody who actually understands this stuff, meaning Diamond, Morgan. Okay. So now, recently, Judy Shelton, who Trump tried to get onto the Federal Reserve Board, was chatting with Grant Williams on a podcast and explained that early in the Trump administration, they were talking about 50 and 100-year bonds. Right. And me and just about everybody in the dissident, Austrian was like, 100-year bonds. Who the hell is going to give the American government a 100-year bond? Like, the American government's not going to last another 10 years. Yeah. So talk about selling a pig in a poke. But what they didn't talk about, because no one was capable of talking about it then, because they didn't have the power and they didn't have the infrastructure and they didn't have the game board, the board state to do this. What they were actually talking about was issuing 50 and 100-year bonds with a partial redemption clause for Treasury gold. Now, you issue a 50 or 100-year bond, you're going to issue it at a far higher interest rate than even a 30-year bond, right? Because under normal conditions, the yield curve rises. The longer you put your money, you forego your capital, the higher the rate of return you should get because you're taking on more risk. This is just basic interest rate theory. But here's the thing. If the government was willing to pledge some of its Treasury gold to those debts, they could sell those bonds at nominal coupon rates that would be far lower than you normally would. They would be selling those 50 and 100-year bonds at, minus 2% to the 30-year, minus 1% to the 30-year. Right now, imagine that, paying that out, and then taking all of the low maturity debt, because we've got an average maturity curve in the United States of 5.5 years. So that has to be lengthened. So you take all that debt, roll it into 50-year bonds with a 5% gold cover clause, selling them at, at the rate of the current, at the 2-year rate. And they could have done this in 2017, by the way, and fix the US's fiscal problem along with Social Security and Medicare reform overnight. It would be done. It's over. So, I mean, 90% of the, I can't do the numbers off my head, but just get David Stockman and everybody else. So get it. I love Stockman. He's a friend of mine. He's a patron, but dude, this can be done. You can run the numbers and we can get rid of most of that. We can get rid of most of those unfunded liabilities. Moreover, you put that plan into place and global capital will scream into the US for that and underwrite all of that. Happily underwrite all that. And that point, the Fed would allow the price of gold to rise. Because now it's in the Fed's best interest to allow the price of gold to rise, because then actually when they go to float, that's what's going to come next. If what I think is going to happen, and now I think about it, obviously this is the plan post 2024. You put Trump or DeSantis or somebody back in office with a GOP majority, with a strong Federal Reserve after you've bankrupted Europe, and then you turn around and go, we're going to fix our fiscal problem, and this is how we're going to do it. Done. And by then they'll have allowed the price of gold, and then they will just lift the price. They'll lift the cap on the price of gold. They'll give Europe their Basel III rules about about gold derivatives and all this stuff, and they'll allow the price of gold to rise after they control the freaking market. Yep. And now the United States can survive this as a 50-state compact and as a node of the rule of law, contract law, and all the rest of it. And then we can decide what world we're going to, what kind of country we're going to be after that. And it's going to be one with a much smaller military. Because in order to, we're going to need to cut the military down by a factor of 2. Because we can't afford to pay $800 billion a year in military costs. Because most of that just goes to base maintenance around the world. I mean, we pull all those troops home and the DOD's budget can go back to, a rational number overnight.
If we go back to Trump that you mentioned. So
sure.
If Trump was unexpected, would, so obviously it seems like, Goldman and JP Morgan, these types of people, they obviously whispered in Trump's ear to get Powell nominated as the Fed chairman. If Trump hadn't been elected, and because it was unexpected, and Hillary had gotten in, would they have been able to do the same thing?
No, absolutely not. They would have been sitting there over cigars and whiskey at the end of the week going, yep, we've got to take it.
So maybe
Hillary's going to sell us out because we're done. Because if you look at what Obama and Biden did, the minute they got back into power, they put all the same people back in power that they had in power before. So Yellen at Treasury, Gensler at the SEC.
So they obviously, maybe they didn't anticipate he would win, but then obviously they were supportive behind the scenes, hoping Trump would win.
Maybe, yeah, but they probably couldn't even come out and do. I mean, did they throw money at him?
Not publicly. Maybe not publicly.
Yeah, not publicly, certainly, because they couldn't do that and you don't want to tip your hand either. Yeah. But the big tip was that all of Goldman Sachs wound up in the Trump White House. And here's something else to think about. And I brought this up in an interview the other day I did. Did you notice that we had one Treasury Secretary for the entirety of the Trump administration? They usually last, 2 years? Mnuchin was in there the entire time because he was laying the groundwork, I think, for this. He has someone, because if anybody else, I mean, there came a point where Trump had the team around him that he trusted. And that trust had to be, okay, this is what we're going to do. COVID was Davos striking back to try and stop all this. Yeah. Just because it forced the Fed to put off quantitative tightening for 2 years.
Is it not possible that, say, Morgan, Sachs, whoever we want to put in that group, actually is having more influence behind the scenes to get Trump in? Because essentially, if Powell was going to be their man to help save them, in order to get Powell in, they need Trump in. So is it possible?
It's possible. I mean, it's like everything else, put a percentage on it. It's a theory. Put a percentage on what it is. the day I get to sit down with Jamie Dimon off the record, over cigars and whiskey, and I say, come on, dude, were you guys backing Trump in the right areas? Did you, did you see what needed to be done to make sure that the Amish turned out in record numbers in Lancaster, Pennsylvania to flip? No, of course he didn't. I mean, I just look at this and go, no, I just think that, they looked at it and Trump won 6 or 7 zip codes that flipped the election. It's just that simple. It's the Electoral College. And, maybe on their board, they had Trump at a 35% chance to win. I had him at a 55 to 60% chance to win. But that's because I understood the demographics of the problem. I understood the populist nature of the revolt of the 2016 election, which is that it didn't matter who it was, Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. People were not going to vote for Hillary. The question was going to be whether or not they were going to be able to cheat well enough to get that woman past the finish line, and they weren't able to.
Yep.
Trump won the 2020 election in a walk. There's no way Joe Biden got 81 million votes. There's no way. I mean, the best turnout election of all time, with all of the Obama hope and change and everybody coming out of the woodwork, 57% voter turnout, and we had 70% for Trump versus Biden, where Biden didn't campaign. Yeah, pull the other leg. It plays fucking jingle bells. Like, it's just bum. Like, and it just, like, you believe it because you want to believe it. You believe it because you can't contemplate or fathom the implications of believing it, which is also why you refuse, which is why the people we talked about at the beginning of the show are so resistant to the idea that there's a transnational global oligarchy moving things around. Like, of course there are, but they don't necessarily run the world, guys. They just think they run the world and then act as if they run the world, and try and sell it in the media that they run the world. But the world is far more complicated than them for any group of people, no matter how powerful they are, to run. There's 9 to 7 billion of us, for Christ's sake. These people can barely control their own staff.
So just
like, come on.
Along the same lines of thinking, right? So if Powell and the Fed hold all this power, I mean, I guess I was just reading today another headline, like the director of the CIA said Putin was far too healthy, right? And there's been like some.
It was like the exact phrase was disturbingly healthy or something like that. I tweeted it out yesterday. I said that just seems way too ominous a phrase coming from the CIA director.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, see, there's like these not even veiled threats, really, against
It's not even veiled.
Who sits at command of a nuclear arsenal. So if Powell is in this pivotal position, is he himself not in danger? I mean, he doesn't have nuclear arms. He's armed with a PhD in economics. So if he's so crucial, of course easily be suicidal?
Yeah, no, I worry about Powell's security. They got Shinzo Abe the other day. They're down. We're now in the very dangerous portion of this, which is where people start getting assassinated.
Right.
Okay. And it's happening left and right. Now, the bigger question is, again, I identified this a year ago saying, okay, so we got Powell to raise the reverse repo rate by 5%, 5 basis points, which sort of the self-tightening process, which then necessitated the attack on to get built, which was, trying to presage the passage of Build Back Better. And then Manchin and Sinema stand up against this bill for months on end by themselves. How does that happen without somebody standing behind them saying, don't worry about it. You keep doing what you're doing. We have your back. You are protected. Now, ask yourself, who's giving that protection? I don't know, but I know that they're protected.
Yeah.
They have to be protected. They're still breathing.
So then,
and Hillary was spotted in the area here and there, and yet they're still breathing. Like this is all I can tell you is that when you see when you see anomalous events like that, that's when you ask yourself the question, who's providing the security guarantee for them? Oh, it can only be somebody so powerful that Davos won't go after them. Because I got news for you. They all have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. Right? Like, it's not hard for tomorrow for JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup and the Fed to literally bankrupt everything and counter anything the ECB tries to do. They're all still playing nice with each other. But tomorrow, if the word went out, oh no, we're taking out Intesa Sanpaolo, ING, Credit Agricola, and Deutsche Bank, get ready. That's what we're doing. That's Thursday. By Friday, I want them a smoking ruin. When that order goes out, that order gets executed. And when that order gets executed, we wake up to a shitstorm of a bunch of headlines. Guess what? Hasn't happened yet. You know why? Because they haven't tried to kill Manchin and Sinema. Because they haven't tried to kill Jerome Powell. Because that's how tenuous things are. So, that's the way I would read it. And look, if, I'm sitting at the, one of the things that I was been thinking about this a lot recently, because I keeps coming up in conversation when I do these conversations. I thinking about my process, and because people ask me about it, like, how do you figure this stuff out? I'm like, you've never sat down and played an area control board game against me? I've been doing this since I'm 15 years old. I'm miserably competitive and a horrible human being to play against, and I will do everything imaginable to beat you. But I spent years and years and years sitting at the table and analyzing a massively multi-variable scenario with 5 people at the table going, well, he's got those assets and he doesn't matter. He's out. He doesn't. And then you just do the calculus and go, how does he win? How does he win? How does he win? How does he win? All you got to do is take yourself and move yourself into somebody else's position and then assess their assets and go, okay, well, that's what they're going to do. And very few people have the ability to do that because it's very hard. Like, dude, it's not easy, which is why I'm good at this. But I trained myself to be good at it. So, but you can get better at it. You can get good at it. It's once you realize that that's what you have to do in order to do this. Like, I always look at this stuff and go, how would I win if I was the Russians right now? What would I do? If I were the Fed, what would I do? If I were, and then if I'm Giuseppe Conte, I go, well, if I'm a captured pawn, how do I get out from underneath that? I dig up dirt on Mario Draghi that he's trying to, starve the country, give all of Italy's gas to Germany, leak that out to various people, and then get confirmation from the Federal Reserve that, yeah, when you make your move, we'll back you, or the people backing the Fed, whatever that faction, call that what you want. I'm just using the Fed as the de minimis faction at this point, but I don't know who that faction actually is. Call it the U.S. Patriots, call it the White Hats, call it what you want. I don't care. Call it aliens. I don't care. Doesn't matter. It's those guys. They're white. The Europeans are black. The Russians are red. The Chinese are green. The Indians are purple. Do the math, and then just start doing the firing solutions for each one of these people as to how they're going to get out of this and win. And, when you're the UK, all you're trying to do is stay in the game. Yeah. When you're certain players, all you're just trying to do is stay in for another round. Think of it like a poker table, and you're the short stack. How do you stay in past another round of blinds and hope that you get the right cards?
So right? Certainly, regardless of whether where COVID came from or how serious and whether it's exaggerated, clearly sure. The response to COVID is a big factor in this whole.
Is a big operation.
Right. So I've either about Operation Warp Speed and Trump's role in this. Like, why did he champion this sort of vaccine disaster? Did he legitimately overestimate the COVID threat, or was it more? Is there more business to it? Like, was he trying to ensure that U.S. businesses got a leg up on foreign?
I think neither of those things are true. I think Trump was given, as like everybody else, bad information. He was lied to by all the people around him. He's a CEO. He trusts his advisors. He's in a situation that is insane. He's being targeted from every position. Think of Donald Trump in the moment. Think of what you would do. And maybe, just maybe, he's not Hitler and he actually has a heart. And he doesn't want to see people die. And he's just doing his job as president to try and coordinate stuff. We know now. Do you think he was told anything about the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines? Do you think anybody was told about that stuff at that point in time? No. No one knew anything. I'm sorry. I just don't buy it. Like, it's not hard. Trump is not a complicated person. Like, it's just Occam's razor. He just responded and was manipulated to respond in real time exactly how they had him on the psychological profile of him. Because they've got a psychological dossier on all of us.
I guess what I'm wondering if there was, and this is not it's malevolent, just I wonder if there is an angle where there's a desire to be the first to get this, set the standard for some of this tech, right? Like mRNA.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, is that part of his calculus?
You need Moderna to set the standard before Bayer. You need AT&T to get their surveillance grid up before Deutsche Telekom. Is that a factor?
Well, yeah, sure. Like, does Trump care about something that way? Sure. Does that factor into his thinking? Yeah. In COVID, come on, he's floundering left and right, like just like everybody else, in a sea of bad information. He's being told it's the Chinese. He's being told it's this. He's being fed everything imaginable to trigger every limbic response that he could possibly have in real time with people who were actively sabotaging him the entire time he was president.
And since you brought up China,
period.
What is happening?
That's Trump. That's the legacy of Trump's presidency.
What is happening in China with their sort of insane lockdown policies? Do they believe COVID poses a bigger threat to whatever China?
They have internal unrest issues from property issues, from a credit bust. They've got other issues where they're trying to support the Russians through enforce supply chain breakdowns to support the Russians to boomerang Western sanctions. I firmly believe that as well. I think it's a mixture of everything. You know, that's why I said earlier that there's a possibility here that the Chinese could wind up being, as Martin Armstrong predicts, the destination for global capital 10 years from now. Very possible. But it may not look like what it looks like, but China may not look like what it looks like today. And it may not look like what everybody on the right or I call them the Steve Bannon Navy intelligence, right? That's Kyle Bass, and they're all fucking CIA. They're all freaking CIA, Navy intelligence. These people, I just don't give a shit. Like, they're all these China hawks. I just have so little time for them because they overstate the threat massively in order to give Davos a freaking free pass. It bothers the crap out of me. I think China's a problem, and China will deal with it. But the Chinese think we're a problem. That means let's come to the table. Let's get sane people in charge and then negotiate a new world order, for lack of a better term. I use that term ironically. A better world order. A multipolar one where the Chinese have their Syrian influence, the Russians can balance the Americans and the Chinese so that they can last long term and rebuild their demographics and the rest of it. Like, this is what we want, and leave Europe to really consider the consequences of their actions for the next 100 years, because that's not what they deserve. That's what's coming to them. Europe is going to be a smoking economic ruin for 100 years. What Davos has done to them. And I think the countries that get out first are going to be the ones that rebuild first. It's going to be Hungary, Italy, possibly, and most of the Warsaw Pact countries in Italy. Possibly Greece if they decide to go along with the Italians. We'll see what happens. I don't know. But with China, like, it's an interesting story. I'm more worried not worried, but the thing to watch for with the Chinese is going to be the break of the Hong Kong dollar peg, which will then start reprice their ability to reprice their import export costs, right? So a lot of Chinese mercantilism is built on the back of the Hong Kong dollar peg. So let's get that removed. Fed is actively trying to destroy that as well. Like all these things need to break. Saudis need to break the peg to the real, to the dollar, to formally end the petrodollar system. The Hong Kong dollar peg needs to break. The euro needs to be a part of history. Like these things all need to occur. And then we can start talking about what's going to happen internally within the US. And then then the vestiges of US and British imperialism as personified by the neoconservatives like Hillary, Pompeo, Lindsey Graham, and the rest of them, then that will need to be the thing we deal with. We deal with Davos first, then we kill the neocons.
Yeah.
Right. But it has to be in this order. It can't be Davos. It can't be the neocons before Davos. It has to be Davos first, then the neocons. Because at that point, in that order, the Eurodollar system is the projection of not just European oligarchic power, but also the CIA's power and MI6 and so many other actors. Like the offshore dollar system needs to be destroyed. And look, Powell came out and said there's room in the world for more than one reserve currency. Yeah. What do you think that means? Said it at a Humphrey Hawkins interview. Like, for Christ's sake, you couldn't say it in a more official place. So.
All right. What is the most intelligent or thought-provoking pushback you get on some of these ideas? I'm sure there's a lot of just nonsense, Russia shill.
Funny. I wouldn't say most intelligent, but the most common is, SOFR isn't important.
Right.
Because they don't understand the value. They understand the value of it. They don't understand that SOFR was put in place to decouple the American banks from the rest of the world. The world is moving to individual interbank offer rates, basically. And that's the big sea change.
The dollar.
The big pushback for me, I think the biggest pushback though is going to be that the U.S. can get their fiscal house in order.
Right. So is it
because everybody's operating under really bad assumptions about how to deal with the unfunded liabilities? But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, just can the dollar? I mean, it's such can a global reserve currency, can it decouple and then still exist?
Not as the global reserve currency.
Not as global reserve, but decouple, but then still
it can resist. Sure, it can exist.
Still continue in a smaller role after that.
Sure, it can do so. I don't think it's going to be easy or fun.
Yeah.
I'm not saying to quote George C. Scott from Dr. Strangelove, it's not like we're not going to get our hair mussed. Like it's not like it's not going to be horrible. Like the next 10 years are going to suck for a lot of people. But we can get through this. I don't know that we will. When I say that we can get through this, doesn't mean that we will. Like I go from inflection point to inflection point to inflection point. And at this point, I don't predict anything more than that. Everything you've heard from my mouth today projecting what's going to happen after the midterm elections is rank speculation. It is predicated on certain things happening in a particular order. But if any of those things don't happen in that order, the whole roadmap changes. Yep. Now, my roadmap, which I've been laying out for over a year, just got strengthened this week with the fall of the Italian government. So that raises everybody's percentage. That should raise everybody's percentages. And I'm right that if you want me to be right, which I don't know about you, but I kind of want to be right. Not because I want to be right, because it feeds my ego, but because, dude, we get to get out of this and avoid World War III. We get to avoid nuclear war. We get to avoid all the terrible things that are on the table.
Yeah.
We get to avoid living in Minority Report, but with more Germans. Like this is anathema to my existence. When I honestly think about that, all I want to do is run and go live in a freaking cave. Because I don't want to give these people my time. I just want to pull a John Galt and fuck off. But I can't do that now. Like, so this has nothing to do with my ego, which is a completely separate issue for me and my therapist. But Hey, that's serious. Like I don't know. I just know that the midterms have to go off in a certain way, and then we get to see what's going to happen during the transition, and then we get to see and every moment there's going to be opportunities, as my partner would put it, opportunities for buckery, right? And then what comes next? I don't know, but we have paths, and if we can properly identify the players, where they are, and what the potential outcomes for their actions could be, and push things in that direction, then we know where to put the pressure within the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
That's all we can do. My goal is to put these ideas out there, have them filter up to people who are actually in a position to make decisions, and then let the chips fall where they may. And then when I see them responding in real time to well, here's the next thing you should do. I could use a freaking royalty payment. It wouldn't be bad. Like, I'm not going to argue, everybody likes money, but what I want is the world to be a better place. So, and that's the only way we get. And I think that's one of the main ways we get there, because that's ultimately what this is all about. This is about stopping these people from killing off 6.5 billion people and making us eat bugs.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good place to end this.
Cool.
Optimistic. All right.
No, optimistic, as the Russians would put it. Like, I'm still like rolling dice and hoping that we don't have nuclear war, because I'm really worried about the neocons. Because that's the like, when you do a SWOT analysis of killing Davos first, they're going to use the opportunity then to try and launch World War III once there's a power vacuum in Europe. And I don't know how to get past that, other than someone puts the kibosh on all of it. And I don't know who that person would be at this point. So sounds good.
Well, we can all stay tuned, and
we'll do it again.
Yeah.
And we'll find out. So appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for making the time for this.
Absolutely.
I'm going to direct everyone to dive deeper into these ideas at tomluongo.me. Is there anywhere else we should be directing people?
Twitter, TFL1728, and obviously from my from the blog, you can get to my Patreon, and we go from there. And that's the big one. And I try to do the stuff, bringing markets and geopolitics together. But really, what I do behind the scenes in the private podcast and market reports I do for my patrons, I really make that explicit, like by showing how these things show up in price charts of strategic markets. I think that's the thing that's the most valuable portion of it, that and the building the community at this point. So there you go.
All right. Thanks again.
All right. Absolutely. Have a great weekend.
Thank
you for the invite.
Bye-bye.